Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And we would like also to thank the Data for Policy organizers for inviting us, for selecting our paper and inviting us to speak at this conference. It's not only an honor for us, but also a responsibility, since this is very much a work in progress. So now more than ever, we welcome any criticism, recommendation, or suggestion on how to improve our paper, which is, as you can see from the title, about blockchains and GovTech, governmental technologies. Now, we adopt very much of a regulatory approach to understand to what extent and how blockchains may fulfill the public interest concerns posed by the specific laws that govern the public services. So, blockchains and for governmental services are still a technology as a technology are still at their infancy, with only a handful of applications all over the world. So we know that so we have very little empirical experience about their use. However, there have been a number of studies which have highlighted a number of advantages of the use of these technologies for public services. In particular, these advantages include increased transparency, the auditability and accountability of the service, but also reduced bureaucracy, discretionary power and corruption of the public authority providing the service. But also the fact that they might bring cost and time savings, as well as promotes this citizen participation and trust, thanks to their decentralized structure. However, despite these clear advantages, we posit, and this is also a crucial part of our research hypothesis, that blockchain may bring a shift in the governance equilibria of the value chain by transferring power and control to private stakeholders. This happens because there are a number of private parties, legal or physical entities, that contribute to the creation and also to the maintenance of the blockchain. And these problems may arise from a legal perspective, first and foremost because of the definition that we give of blockchain itself, which is very often defined as a mere technical tool. Now, the blockchain, as we will see throughout this presentation, has a strong technical aspects. And according to that, it could be also defined as a very advanced form of database, so a sort of database on steroids. However, as I said before, there are a number of parties that are contributing to the creation and maintenance of these advanced database. And very often, the relationship between these parties and between the parties, among these parties and between these parties and the public authority who is in charge of providing this service is very often not formalized, which means that the governance powers of these private parties are often not clear, or at least not clearly defined, neither by the contract nor by the law, which also implies, in turn, that their powers are not clearly delimited by any form of regulation, and ultimately this implies that also the risk related to the performance of all the obligations underlying this relationship are not clearly and formally allocated. In our paper, we don't deal with all legal risks related to this relationship. So, for example, for criminal charges or risk for civil, for tortures or contractual harm. This is not our aim to analyze every single type of legal liability that may arise from this kind of relationship. But what we do is mainly to define the instances in which these private parties can distort the ecosystem to their advantages, and how this situation can be regulated in order to prevent this kind of what we call private capture. So this is our aim, our objective in this paper. Now, having in mind that the governance system and the power structure and the power relations within the blockchain have a fluid nature, a flexible nature, we also know that there is room for private parties to distort the ecosystem to their own advantage. Phenomenon that we call as private capture within the blockchain. This may take place in particular in two situations. First of all, when there is a collusive behavior among the different private stakeholders. So this can take place when there is an agreement between these parties, or when they knowingly align their behaviors without though formalizing this agreement. A second instance would be the one in which there is an abuse of dominance. So when there is one dominant party within the blockchain who abuses this power, for example, by raising entry barriers, the so-called gating, or abusing its hashing power, or locking in consumers, or again softening competition within the blockchain, softening price competition, for example, for public services in a public tender. So when bids are involved, while a collusive behavior in a public tender may take place when the parties use the blockchain in order to rig the bidding process, right? So we consider all these instances of private capture, but we intended to adapt them to the particular needs of public services that though are not always the same. In particular, one has to first and foremost determine whether the public service is a service of general economic interest or a market-based service, because public authority are very often are providing either type of service. This is important because the policy objectives and the underlying policy objectives will differ. While market-based services usually pursue allocative efficiency, and in general economic efficiency, not necessarily allocative, but in general economic efficiency, the services of general economic interest are generally aimed at solidarity, or at fulfilling the so-called egalitarian principle. And this is fundamental also for the determination of the powers within the blockchain and the bounds of the powers within the blockchain, because also the blockchain has to be informed by these general aims of the service. Now, though, what are our policy recommendations when it comes to the implementation of blockchains in either of the two cases? So, public services delivered in provided for services, market-based services, and public services that are aimed at that are general economic interest services. Well, our policy recommendations, first of all, start from the determination of the type of service. So we believe that the type of blockchain and the governance structure within the blockchain should be tailored on the type of service and the type of authority that has to provide it. So first of all, one has to determine the type of service that has to be provided. So is it a general economic interest service? Is it a market-based service, etc.? Then it has to be then the objectives of this service, the final aims and objectives of this service have to be clearly defined. So is it about equal provision of the service, or about the economic efficiency that the provision of the service has to strike? And only on the basis of this, one can establish the governance structure of the value of the blockchain. Now here we are developing a matrix that combines to each type of power relation a type of governance structure that may fit best in for certain goals and public authorities and public services. Okay, so this is the type of matrix that we are developing at the moment. Why? Because on this basis, one has to first of all determine whether a blockchain is still needed. It might be possible that, especially for services of general economic interest, that the public authority is able to better preserve and ensure and guarantee the protection of those interests that are very often protected also by constitutional rights, if not administrative laws. If the blockchain is still needed because it brings advantages that outweigh the disadvantages, well, one has to specify its main characteristics and the power of allocation within it. By the same token, and consequently, also the risk allocation will be more clear within the blockchain. It will be inevitable in this process to give explicitly or implicitly a legal definition of this blockchain, of this relationship between the blockchain and the public authority, which we found that very often can be very similar to a PPP, a public-private partnership, with important advantages also for risk allocation rules, and also rules on civil and criminal and administrative liability. However, this is not always this is not always true, as the legal definition has to be based on a case-by-case analysis of the relationship itself. So these are our conclusions on this paper that has, as we said before, it's a work in progress. We hope to be able to share very soon also this matrix that we are developing, and we would be very happy to receive your recommendations also on how to improve that. And also from a legal perspective, we hope to receive criticism on our legal definitions of these relations, as well as from a technological perspective. Perhaps you can tell us, you can remind us about what we forgot to include. So thank you very much again for listening to us, and we hope this was useful, and we hope to have a constructive discussion with you during the conference. Thank you again, and goodbye.